We're live now. Hello, I'm John from Broadsheet, and you're very welcome to Tomorrow Tonight. We're joined by Bernard Purcell, who is the editor of The Irish World, which is a London-based paper for Irish immigrants and is on sale here and available in England tomorrow and Ireland on Thursday.
That's correct.
Good evening, Bernard.
Good evening, John.
How are you? We were just talking briefly. You weren't too well last week, but you're back now. You're back feeling better. You had the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Yes, it didn't cause any illness. It's just it hits people different ways in the first day or two, and sometimes the second dose does as well. So it was a particularly busy period. I was back in harness by Wednesday, but certainly the first day or two was a bit strange. But it's a small price to pay.
And you have a second dose of this?
No, I haven't got that due until the end of May. But I do have colleagues and neighbours who've had the second dose, and some are working in the NHS, and some have found it does leave them feeling wobbly for a day or two.
Right. Well, you've got it now. So do you feel a sense of kind of freedom of some kind? Do you feel?
Do I want to become a rat licker? No, not yet. It takes about 10 to 20 days to kick in, and one can be an asymptomatic carrier as well at the same time. So it's just best to exercise caution all at the same time. But
right.
No,
Bernard, would you mind?
Mike?
No. The mic is fine. Were you phoned up? How did you get it? I mean, did the doctor just say contact you and?
There's two systems operating here. There's the national rollout, which is part of the NHS because everybody's on the database, and then there's the local health centres. So if you're not contacted by one, you'll be contacted by the other. The likelihood is you'll be contacted by two, in which case if you've made an appointment, you can cancel one and go to the other. I had mine at the Science Museum. A little sense of history there.
Right.
But I think the people are getting quite competitive. In fact, one of the volunteers there was looking forward to getting his in Westminster Abbey. And if you saw, Stephen Fry had his in Poets' Corner there. So there's a certain amount of vaccine snobbery about where you get it, or one-upmanship. There are health centres doing just as well.
Bernard, the mic now is ruffling.
There's a certain amount of one-upmanship or hyacinth bucket about where you get your vaccination going on at the moment.
And you've got the AstraZeneca, but were you planning to get the Johnson? I mean, are you enviously looking at people who get the Pfizer vaccine, or
no, not at all?
You're happy with the AstraZeneca? Yeah.
Two members of my household have had the Pfizer, so it's not an a la carte. You don't really get to choose, but
right.
But I think there's a lot of capacity with the AstraZeneca, as we've learned at the moment. So
yeah, and countries like Finland have banned it outright. France won't give it to over 55s. Do you feel that's just part of the kind of Brexit propaganda?
There's different testing regimes and different testing processes. I think it's been ridiculously exploited over here, as there's a lot of flag waving and jingoism about it. But there are quite literally 27, 28 different testing regimes and orthodoxies in whether or not a drug is ready to be put into the market. It wasn't helped by the fact that Macron made some ill-informed comments earlier on and confused things. But Fauci said today that even though there do appear to be some irregularities about the testing data that they made available, I think they made earlier testing data rather than the most up-to-date testing data available when they were rushing to market. But Fauci over in the States, who has a certain oracular status, says that he thinks on balance it's very, very good. And all of the independent testing does suggest that it's effective. This is a pandemic, so whatever works, and people take it. I think there's enough people who have commented that they'd rather use their own, in those countries where they can't get it, they would rather use their own discretion and take it than be caught in what to sometimes seems like political point scoring.
Right. And also it's getting kind of mandatory over there, isn't it, for care home staff? And
well, nobody's going to be forcibly inoculated. but there is a discussion going on, and we've seen one of the big health unions come out against the idea of compulsion. But as a condition of employment, if you are working with people who are vulnerable, it is a reasonable expectation that you are not potentially infectious yourself. So if the logical inference of that is that you turn to another job or another assignment within your organization, I think that most people would understand that. But there isn't any question of strapping people down and forcing them to take injections.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, physically forcing the vaccine, but certainly they could lose their jobs in the care home if they won't vaccinate.
Well, there's the whole care home industry needs much greater love, care, attention, and I mean these are people working on very, very low wage in very poor conditions, largely because the government cut all local authority funding. So local authorities have to look for the cheapest possible arrangements they can get with care homes. So we've had 10 years of cuts in all those that basic social provision, and repeatedly we've heard promises that it will be looked at, it will be so. The problems in care homes run considerably deeper than whether or not somebody would keep their job because they're not prepared to take the vaccination. In fact, I think you would find most people working in care homes would rush to take the vaccination because they took the brunt of the infection throughout the past year, and today being the first anniversary. And we saw that there were some care homes where staff actually cut themselves off from their families and stayed in isolation, sealed with their charges for periods of 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks.
Yeah, that story is yet to be told, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Can I there was a prime time this evening, and Michael McGrath, the Fianna Fáil Minister for Public Expenditure.
I believe he said that people in the Republic might actually turn against a united Ireland.
Oh, okay.
Is that what you were going to tell me about?
No, but that's it was more his sort of approach about for people to hold on, to sort of, I'll just play it anyway. It's sort of,
a long way down the road. This is the hardest part of the journey, and we acknowledge that. And people are just trying so hard now to stay on track and to see this through. We can see our destination. It is almost within reach. And so our ask of people is to stay the course, to bear with us. The government is putting enormous resources into all of the areas that people expect. We are now a long way down the road. This is the part of the journey.
Sorry, I think maybe people are way beyond that level of rhetoric.
Well, I mean, it's hard to argue with anything he says. I mean, we are supposed.
He could have said that in any time over the last 12 months. That was
yes.
The point, yeah.
Yes. But what we have seen is that having huge waves of infections and deaths, they do appear now to be falling, although it does look like the third wave in Europe could well make its way back here, although
well, this is it. So the destination isn't really in sight, is it?
I'm not an expert epidemiologist. I would err on the side of caution generally. I mean, it's the analogy we used at the beginning of this when people were getting a bit impatient, and this is I think 9 months ago, was that if you talk to mountaineers, it's usually the coming down is the most dangerous part rather than the ascent. So be it K2 or be it Everest. So the big difficulty or fear that people may have here is people deciding that, right, oh yeah, well, the end isn't sight, sure, we can relax now, we don't have to, or I've had the vaccination, or we've had the vaccination. So people tend to not to observe the safeguards that have actually got us this far, and that's human nature. And that is something, I think that you see it in things like speed limits. If you make the speed limit 40 miles an hour, people go at 45, so rather than 35. So people will tend to be quite subjective, and so it is a genuine cause for concern.
But I mean, they tried to make it 50, but the people made it 70. You know, in terms of the speed limit,
Yeah.
that's was my view. I think the Irish World. Tell me, I only picked it up kind of today in terms of this £5,000 if a returning Irish person comes from London or from Britain.
No, the if you can be fined if you're not traveling properly. If you're not traveling with good cause, there's a £5,000 fine which kicks in a couple of days' time. But there's already a loophole referred to as the Stanley Johnson loophole. If the Prime Minister's father,
Yeah.
if you're going to your holiday home to either prepare it for sale or for rent, or as Stanley Johnson said when he went off to his in Greece and escaped without any sanction last year, just to make it COVID proof. So the point has been made that virtually every member of the cabinet has a holiday home, and so do a lot of their core supporters. So it is causing a certain amount of critical comment.
So your readers, if they had a place in Ireland, then like a cottage or something, they would be exempt from the fine.
Common travel area. Anyone from any of our readers who are Irish in Britain, for instance, traveling to Ireland will have to conform with the rules that exist in Ireland, which means you actually have to have had your test to show that you're COVID-free within the preceding, I think it's 72 hours. Quarantining is required, although I don't think they are required to go to the hotels that came into effect around, and they can quarantine at home and have the option of the test after 5 days. From having looked at the rules in that, it's the high risk countries that 33 of them, I think, that people coming from there are required to stay at those hotels. But anyone in Britain, let's say any of our readers or people here traveling, would be required to have the certification and would be required to quarantine. The same does not necessarily apply in the other direction, which is something we've discussed in the past.
No. Okay. Will we get on to the papers, Bernard?
Yes.
Yep. The Irish Examiner, as ever, always prompt and early. Rapid walk-in testing in COVID-19 black spots. More or less what we were talking there. Penny's planned major expansion of Cork flagship store. I was wondering about Penny's because they don't do online. You know that?
Yes, and it's worked for them quite significantly. If you've ever seen the queues over here, they trade as Primark, and they have a huge. Well, they've even around here in Hammersmith, Shepherd's Bush, but on Oxford Street, they have. You will see huge queues to go in there, and they are very, very popular because of their pricing. And it's been that has worked for them, not going online.
Sharp increase in purity of cocaine available on street. I suppose good news for some, bad news for the guards, good news for the people who like coke, I guess.
I've never taken it. I've seen evidence of it being taken in places where people should know better, and in some cases we're supposed to be upholding the law of the land. And I always absented myself from if there's any too many ordinary people, too many journalists, too many lawmakers have been murdered to make that available for to consume.
It's an interesting economic indicator, though, is when the purity gets, you can't get good coke in this town. That quote.
Well, I prefer Robin Williams' one. It's God's way of telling you too much money.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. The Oasis third album can testify to that. The Sun Monster will blow my head off. Not really sure about that. I'm sure it's sort of Joey the Lips O'Callaghan.
I saw the story. I don't know enough about it, and I would just be talking about it for the sake of it. So it's not one that I'm across in any particular detail.
Again, Joey the Lips. They give them the nicknames. I've not that I feel sorry for Freddie Thompson, but Fat Freddie, he's no longer fat, and he's made great strides to.
I think that's probably the least of his.
Yes, I know. It's just in my mind. Give us a reopening roadmap. Well, Mr. McGrath gave them a show, said the destination was in sight tonight. It's quite a sad cover.
Yes, there's a certain amount of trying to get the defence or the plea for the defence or even mitigation in at the moment. We're in the atmosphere here is one of always permanent campaigning and performative gestures. So we had the anniversary had to be marked by the Prime Minister with a press conference that he really couldn't wait to get out of, but he posed for his photograph, said that he would be haunted with it for the rest of his life. Declined any...
Strange words, weren't they?
There'll be... I mean, there's no admission of culpability or failure, because it's still, the text is still, we did everything we could, although there is a slight attempt now to redraw the narrative and say that, well, nobody fully understood the nature of asymptomatic infection at the time, which is not true if you look back and if you look at the warnings. And there are still questions over the time taken to actually respond seriously. Also, what happened in the care homes, as we said earlier.
Yeah.
The one thing that I think people want this government to succeed in tackling COVID rather than saying, I told you so. And one of the worst things that could happen with the kind of populism that goes on is that they'd ignore the mistakes they've made just because of the success, an admirable success of the vaccination rollout. And that would tempt them to hubris when I think there's an opportunity, particularly with the row that we're seeing over the threatened possible boycott of vaccinations, which Angela Merkel and Micheál Martin have both said is a madness, because it would have a knock-on effect on the supply lines for all the other manufacturers. So you really would be cutting off your nose to spite your face with that.
Yeah.
But it would be nice rather than to actually see this pitching, constant posing the EU as an enemy or the perfidious neighbour, which the populist jingoism, which we do see an awful lot of. And I think even some are choosing to interpret his comment that the infection that's currently on the continent will wind up on our shores. I mean, I think to a large extent, it's the Kent variation that actually came from here that's making its way throughout Europe.
Yeah. The what happened to the South African variant? Wasn't that?
Oh, it's out there mingling.
Right. Okay. Okay. Why can we say we call it we can call it the South African variant or the Kent variant, but we can't call it the Chinese?
Well, because I think that one pretty much disappeared when it was locked down. I mean, you get the variants when from, like everyone else, I'm no more expert than anyone, but from having read it and covered it for a long time, last year, the freer the virus is, it'll go through several iterations. So if there's plenty of mingling, if there's no lockdown, you'll get a much more pernicious virus, and then that some will have their own unique DNA compositions, which is why they'll identify them as the one first discovered in Kent, or the one discovered in Rio, or the one discovered in South Africa. And the freer they are to regenerate, the more pernicious, the stronger they become.
Frank Worthington, I'm not sure if you recall Frank Worthington, this footballer, has died.
Yes, before my time, and I'm not a huge soccer fan, but he is. There's been some tributes to him. I know you used to buy Goal and Shoot. I used to get them for my brothers, but I was more of a fair weather fan, I'm afraid.
Oh, right. Well, he was, he is certainly a type of footballer you literally never see today. Kind of cigarettes, half time, and.
Well, I think the entire world beating the Liverpool side was like that. They'd come on to the pitch just a couple of hours after being at nightclubs, still stinking of booze and smoking, and they would won everything in front of them, and they would fail the most rudimentary fitness test today.
So anyway, Rodney Marsh, who's of similar type to Frank Worthington, says goodbye. Children in line for COVID jabs from August.
Well, there are suggestions because they played down the fact that there are concerns about the supply and the timetable. But I think if the official line is that even if they are as bad as predicted in that internal memo that was released last week, it might just set things back by about a month. So it does appear to be going according to timetable with, say, younger adults expecting to be vaccinated, perhaps July, perhaps August.
The shot you got, though, can you imagine a kid getting that?
I'm not an expert.
No, I mean, but you have first-hand experience of receiving it.
Yes, but everybody responds differently to
Sure.
to them. I mean, and there is Pfizer, there is Johnson and Johnson. There are other ones. I think.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just. How would you feel? I mean, I know your children are grown up. Would you be comfortable giving them under 10?
On the balance of risk, yes, I would.
After, yeah, okay. I'm not trying to.
It's okay. I didn't think you did, but it's a question of balance of risk.
Sure. Johnson admits COVID regrets, but rejects clamour for public inquiry. I have to say, the haunted thing is kind of very emotional, very not emotional, but very strange use of word. Use of momentary.
Well, it might be doing him a disservice here, but it puts you in mind of, say, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, who, when she was challenged on something, she said she regretted it if people felt that, rather than actually expressing any.
I'm sorry if you were offended.
Yeah.
It's terrible. Get out, isn't it? How do you find Patel in terms of? Do you see her as a future leader?
Then we're in a far worse. I mean, there are elements here that cause one to be apprehensive about the direction politics is going, and it really can be cause for concern. I mean, the system is even at a binary way, the way it is at the moment, is very, very far from perfect. It's I heard an Israeli professor of politics in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv this morning bemoaning the fact that their political system is so the PR allows so many small parties disproportionate influence. And he was asked, well, what about a system like Britain? And he said, God, no, that's too far in the other extreme. That's non-functioning. So when you have Israeli professors of politics who think that the system's not working here, and the thought of Priti Patel as Prime Minister would cause me sleepless nights, to give you a straight answer.
This new plan that they have they're sending people back to the point of entry, or effectively.
Yes, and there's a use of language as well. Well, some of the stuff that they're claiming is, for instance, to create this notion of legality and illegality, say for asylum seekers. They're not illegal. They're actually using the system as it was built and as Britain pioneered. There's also a clause that was pointed out the other day in the new policing legislation that say people who might be immigrants or have settled status in this country could have that revoked if they were at a protest deemed to be illegal, because they're trying to clamp down on protests. There's a populist authoritarianism that, as I said, it's this perpetual campaigning that is distasteful and is cause for concern.
Yes, and also for somebody of an ethnic minority, it's very odd, isn't it? But I suppose that's why she was given that position, because it was.
She was given the position not because of any particular expertise in law or the Home Office, but because she, having come through representing, I think, the referendum party, which was the precursor to the UKIP, in their press office, she it was a diehard Boris loyalist and diehard Brexiteer. The uh, cabinet, and this is there is not a single standout talent among them. They are there because of their fealty to Boris Johnson and their fealty to Brexit, and that brings with it its own difficulties at times. Although they have got, since the departure of Dominic Cummings, they have managed to get their act together a little more efficiently behind the scenes.
Yeah, some of them look like genuinely crazy, I have to say. I suppose when you're relying on a kind of a rump of support, you take what you can get, I guess.
Well, it does make you pine for the days of Douglas Hurd and others, and even Solomon Gummer.
You never thought we'd say this, but you would almost, these old kind of One Nation fellows even. So I've got the Daily Mail as well. It's just come in, the Irish Daily Mail, and nothing really of great import here, just the same.
Well, I think over here the edition is having a go at Harry and Meghan again. Certainly, and it's flannel panel at the top. Oh, there they have. Yeah, they're doing it there as well.
Yeah.
Well, it's doing its cheerleading, boostering for the road out of lockdown. So yeah.
Yeah, but there is no roadmap. You see, I think this is the. I mean, it's obviously hugely tempting for Michael McGrath just to be kind of emollient, but they probably know the reality a little bit more. I mean, those kind of phrases don't really work anymore, I don't think.
Well, we ran an interview with the chief executive of Tourism Ireland last week, and he said that it's not going to be back to normal this year. It's not going to be back to normal next year, even though they're planning a 10th anniversary rerun of the gathering, because that's in the government's manifesto. But they're positioning and making their plans for it being 2025. Professor Chris Whitty, the health advisor to England today, has raised the possibility of booster shots being needed in the autumn, but also the fact that we will be living with COVID for the foreseeable future. It may be a seasonal menace, but it's going to be on the horizon. Probably bird flu was as potentially dangerous, was it 10, 20 years ago now? And there's been there was Ebola in the States. The difference is the preparedness that existed and at that time wasn't here this time. And so the infrastructure wasn't there, and the preparation and the response wasn't there. So everybody has been caught in partially because of the lead given by the US, partially because of responses in Europe. So it's been a piecemeal response, so it'll become harder to extricate from it. There hasn't been a systematic, unified response. So it will be a jigsaw. It'll continue, by definition, it will be seasonal.
And well, this is the thing, because in Britain, there's a tender for advertising company for 2 million from June, I think, this year till 2024. So they do know. I also have a friend who worked was in a county court during the week, and a judge was sort of pretty explicit about what was coming their way. So I think the Michael McGrath stuff is a bit unfair. That's what I'm trying to get at here. It's a very childish way or very childlike way to treat people.
The biggest problem where politicians have found themselves running aground is over-promising and under-delivering. So if people want to be told certain things, you tell them what they want to hear, but then they're going to respond in a certain way when things do not pan out as promised, even though their more rational side would presume, if they just take and look at the facts around them. So I think, as you say, if you just tell the truth to people, and some of it inevitably at the beginning had to be making it up as you went along, but now there is systematic planning, and it's not going to be to everybody's convenience, and some aspects of it will be hit and miss. But you're up against a quite formidable opponent in Mother Nature on this one.
Yeah. Just to go through, Martin to unveil staggered easing of restrictions and bid to boost the nation's morale. 5 kilometer travel limits to go to 10 kilometers or even 20 kilometers. Training for children, golf, tennis, and could be back on. So,
well, we have GAA back out here from the 29th.
That's right. Yeah. Great photograph on the back page of the Irish World to announce that. In fact, I'll call up the paper. The cover was.
It was the warning about. It was Ireland trying to say that it will not. It won't support any attempt at vaccination embargoes. And Micheál Martin, as I said, echoing Angela Merkel, saying that you don't want to hit the supply lines. Although Angela Merkel, I see, has said that you do not want to cause that disruption. She hasn't ruled out taking actions against individuals like AstraZeneca, whom the European Union suspects of having sold the same cow twice.
Right. Okay. Hopefully that's not the shot you got.
I have no idea.
Yeah, let's just show the photograph. I thought it was nice. Going on. I don't know what club that is, but is that London?
It's Parnell's Ladies.
Parnell's Ladies. Oh yeah, the badly named. What is Mr. Parnell's Ladies or something? Is it?
Oh, there's a whole treatise or dissertation that can be written about that, and also ask why it's usually men running the Ladies Gaelic Football Association.
Yeah.
It's rich, fertile territory if anyone actually wants to. And my own particular favourite would be if somebody could actually come up with a definitive house style for the use of the apostrophe in any kind of GAA club name.
Yeah, well, it is a nightmare, really, and in these sort of woke times, very very questionable stuff. Bernard, I'm very sorry about your dog.
Look, I've lost dear friends in the last few months, and really precious friends. Surprised just how much of a void that the dog left. He'd been an important fixture of the day for 14 years, and was a particular. But as I said, we've lost people.
Of course,
in the last couple of months, but he'd normally be here, sort of just under the table.
We heard him a couple of times, didn't we?
Yeah. Yeah, he was an Irish Terrier from Doncaster.
Wiry then, was he?
Yep.
Yeah. What was his name?
Ralph.
Well, Ralph, R.I.P. Bernard, thank you very much. I do actually appreciate it. I think it's a unique kind of, well, not unique, but it's a special kind of loss, that you can't really express because people think you're just mad, talking about a dog, isn't it? It's like...
Well, it's also, they coincide with a particular timeline in people's lives. They become, if you think of life like a river that way. So they'll have been part of various signposts or landmarks in your life. But he was a particularly quirky, eccentric dog. And my daughter, who he was actually my daughter's dog, but she particularly liked the fact that when I had my beard, she had a matching set of dad and dog, and they just looked alike.
Great. Well, you might get a new one, maybe, or not.
Not really thinking about that at the moment.
Bernard, thank you very much, and very sorry about Ralph, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Absolutely.